At the company party, my husband humiliated me by calling his mistress his real wife. The moment my billionaire father saw it live, he gave the order that would change everything. End this marriage now. Tonight, I'll destroy that company. Hi, I'm Catherine Reed, 32, a financial analyst with an MBA from Wharton. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but some betrayals are too profound to process alone. This is about how the man I loved shattered our life in public, and how my father's wealth, which I'd always tried to distance myself from, became the sword of justice I never wanted to wield. The chandelier lights reflected off the champagne glasses, creating golden patterns across the ballroom of the Grand Summit Hotel. It was the kind of elegant corporate event that my husband, David, excelled at, working the room, charming investors, making the right connections. I stood in a corner, watching him in his element, a familiar mixture of pride and unease settling in my stomach. 7 years ago, when David and I met at a charity fundraiser, I'd fallen for that same charm. He was handsome, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on financial markets. Not just my family name. The Reed name, synonymous with real estate development across 3 states, was something I'd been trying to escape since college. I wanted to be known for my own accomplishments, not as William Reed's daughter. David had seemed to understand that, or at least that's what he'd led me to believe. "Your husband's quite the social butterfly," remarked Sophia, one of the few executive women at Meridian Capital, the investment firm where David had been working for the past 4 years. "He's already convinced the Hartman Group to schedule a meeting next week. The man could sell sand in a desert." I smiled politely, used to these comments about David's charisma. "He's good at what he does." "And what he does is make money," Sophia added with a knowing look, before drifting away to mingle with other guests. Her words lingered uncomfortably. Yes, David was excellent at making money, but lately, I'd been questioning at what cost. The late nights at the office, the weekend business trips, the secretive phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Classic signs that something wasn't right, yet I'd been choosing to ignore them. Tonight was supposed to be special. Meridian Capital was announcing a major merger, and David, as one of the lead strategists on the deal, would be recognized for his contribution. He'd been working toward this moment for years, a stepping stone to the partner position he coveted. I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress, a designer piece I'd chosen carefully for the occasion. David had always been particular about appearances, especially at company events. "We're being watched," he would remind me. "Perception is reality in this business." I made my way to the bar, ordering a sparkling water with lime. I rarely drank at these functions, preferring to keep my wits about me. As I waited, I felt a presence beside me. "Catherine Reed," came a warm, familiar voice, looking as uncomfortable at a corporate party as ever. I turned to find Michael Chen, an old friend from business school who now worked at a competing firm. His genuine smile was a welcome sight in a room full of calculated networking. "Michael," I said, returning his smile. "What are you doing here?" "Spying on the competition?" "Guilty as charged," he laughed. "Actually, Meridian invited several firms to witness their moment of triumph. Very gracious of them to let us see what we're up against." We fell into easy conversation, the kind that only happens with people who knew you before you constructed the careful image you present to the world. Michael had been there during my most authentic years, when I was still figuring out who I wanted to be, separate from my father's shadow. "How's life treating you?" he asked, still crunching numbers and avoiding the family business. "Still trying to," I admitted, though Dad never stops trying to lure me over to read developments. He thinks investment analysis is a waste of my talents. William Reed remains as subtle as ever, I see. I laughed, genuinely this time. Subtlety has never been his strong suit. "And how's David? Still climbing the corporate ladder at record speed?" Something in Michael's tone made me glance up sharply. There was concern in his eyes, not just casual interest. "He's doing well. Very well, actually. Tonight's a big night for him." Michael held my gaze a beat too long. "Catherine, are you happy?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. Before I could formulate an answer, the room's lighting dimmed and the CEO of Meridian Capital, Robert Hargrove, took to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." I excused myself from Michael, promising to catch up later, and made my way closer to the stage. David would be called up soon, and despite my misgivings, I wanted to be there to support him. That's what marriage was about, wasn't it? Standing by each other through the highs and lows. though lately, it seemed like I was the only one doing the standing. Robert's speech was the usual corporate fare, talking about vision, growth, and synergy. I half listened, my mind drifting to the conversation with Michael. Was I happy? The question seemed simultaneously simple and impossibly complex. And now, Robert continued, I'd like to invite the man whose strategic brilliance made this merger possible. The newest addition to our partnership team, David Reed. Applause erupted as David strode confidently to the stage, his tailored suit accentuating his athletic build. I clapped along with everyone else, noting with a twinge of annoyance that he hadn't mentioned the partnership promotion to me. Another secret in a growing list. Thank you, Robert, and thank you all, David began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. This merger represents not just a business achievement, but a personal one as well. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, I thought he was looking for me. But his gaze settled somewhere to my right, a smile spreading across his face that I recognized. It was his real smile, not the practiced one he used for business functions. I couldn't have done this without the support of some very special people, he continued. My colleagues at Meridian, of course, but most importantly, the woman who has been my rock, my confidant, my true partner in every sense of the word. My heart gave a hopeful flutter. Despite everything, was he going to publicly acknowledge our marriage? It would be uncharacteristic. David usually kept our relationship separate from his professional life, but perhaps the significance of the evening had brought out a more sentimental side of him. Amanda Winters, he said, extending his hand toward the crowd. A slender woman with honey blonde hair stepped forward, her red dress a stark contrast to my navy blue. I recognized her vaguely as someone from the legal department. I'd seen her at previous company events, though David had never formally introduced us. Without her brilliant legal mind and unwavering support, none of this would have been possible, David continued as Amanda joined him on stage. I stood frozen, telling myself this was just professional acknowledgement. Unusual, but not inherently suspicious. Then he wrapped his arm around her waist in a gesture of intimate familiarity. Some of you may not know this, David said, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. But Amanda isn't just the best corporate attorney I know. She's also the love of my life. The room went silent, or perhaps the roaring in my ears just drowned out all other sound. I felt dozens of eyes turn to me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to morbid curiosity. While circumstances have required some discretion until now, David continued, either oblivious to or unconcerned by the bomb he had just detonated, I can finally say publicly what I've known in my heart for the past 2 years. Amanda is my real wife, my partner in every way that truly matters. Amanda beamed up at him, no trace of shame or hesitation on her face. They had rehearsed this. I realized numbly, this public declaration wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty. It was a calculated unveiling of their relationship, with the added bonus of humiliating me in front of David's entire professional network. Someone gripped my elbow, steadying me. I turned to find Michael, concern etched deeply into his features. Let's get you out of here, he murmured. But before I could move, another voice cut through the shocked murmurs of the crowd. I've seen enough. My father's authoritative tone was unmistakable. William Reed, at 72, still commanded any room he entered. 6'2" with a shock of silver hair and piercing blue eyes, the same eyes I'd inherited, he parted the crowd with nothing more than his presence. I hadn't known he would be here tonight. David had said the invitation was merely a courtesy to my father as a prominent business figure in the city, one he was sure the busy magnate would decline. Yet here he was, in an impeccably tailored suit, his expression carved from granite as he assessed the scene before him. Dad, I managed, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. What are you doing here? I came to support my son-in-law, he replied, his eyes never leaving David's now pale face. Apparently, I arrived just in time. David's confident posture had faltered. Amanda's smile faded as she glanced between my father and David, clearly sensing the shift in power dynamics. My father turned to me, his hard expression softening just slightly. Catherine, it's time to leave. I began, but found I had no words. What could I possibly say in this situation? How does one respond to being publicly discarded? My father didn't wait for me to find my voice. He turned to the man beside him, Martin, his head of security, who had been with our family for over 20 years. Get the car, he instructed, and call Richard. Tell him to end this marriage tonight. Then tell James I want every detail on Meridian Capital and David Reed's personal finances on my desk within the hour. Dad, I protested weakly. Don't. And tonight, my father continued as if I hadn't spoken, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom, I'll destroy that company. The collective intake of breath from the assembled corporate elite was audible. Everyone in the room knew that William Reed didn't make idle threats. My father had built his empire from nothing. And along the way, he'd developed a reputation for calculated ruthlessness toward anyone who crossed him or his family. David finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of his miscalculation. Mr. Reed, he called, stepping away from Amanda. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. My father cut him off icily. You made your choice quite public. Now you can face the consequences just as publicly. He placed a protective arm around my shoulders, and despite my usual resistance to his controlling nature, I found myself grateful for his solid presence. Catherine, David called out, finally acknowledging me. You know how these things are. Our marriage hasn't been real for years. This doesn't have to get messy. My father's grip tightened on my shoulder, but I gently stepped away from his protection. 7 years of marriage. And this was how it ended, with a dismissive statement in front of hundreds of witnesses that our marriage hasn't been real for years. Each word was another shard of glass embedding itself in my heart. I straightened my spine, drawing on every ounce of dignity I possessed. You're right about one thing, David. Our marriage wasn't real, but that's because you never were. Turning on my heel, I walked toward the exit, head high despite the tears threatening to spill over. My father fell into step beside me, his hand finding the small of my back, a gesture of support he'd offered since I was a little girl taking my first uncertain steps. As we reached the ornate doors of the ballroom, I heard my father speak quietly into his phone. James, it's William. I want everything we have on Meridian Capital. Yes, everything. And find out who owns the majority of their debt. I'm buying it all. The cool night air hit my face as we stepped outside, and I drew in a deep breath, feeling as though I'd been underwater for hours. Years, maybe. Dad, you don't have to? Yes, Catherine, I do. His voice was firm but gentle. No one humiliates my daughter and walks away unscathed. Not while I'm alive. I'm not a child who needs defending, I protested weakly, even as part of me, the wounded, humiliated part, took savage satisfaction in knowing David would soon regret his actions. My father's driver held the door of the black Bentley open for us. As I slid into the leather seat, my father paused before joining me. You've always wanted to make your own way, Catherine, and I've respected that, even when I disagreed with your choices. His eyes, so like my own, held a mixture of sadness and determination. But sometimes, even independent adults need their family. Tonight, let me be your father. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue. As the car pulled away from the Grand Summit, I caught a glimpse of David hurrying out the front entrance, his face frantic as he scanned the departing vehicles. Our eyes met for a brief moment through the tinted window, and I saw something I'd never witnessed from him before. Fear. My father's hand covered mine, warm and reassuring. It will be all right, Katie, he said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in years. Not tonight, and probably not tomorrow. But eventually. I leaned back against the seat, letting the tears finally fall. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of trying to distance myself from my father's wealth and influence, it was now that very power I was counting on to help me through the darkest moment of my life. The car wound through the city streets, taking me away from the smoldering ruins of my marriage and toward an uncertain future. One thing was clear, though. David had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He had calculated the benefits of publicly humiliating his wife to legitimize his affair, but he had failed to factor in one crucial variable. No one crosses William Reed's family and emerges unscathed. And despite my complicated feelings about my father's methods, a small, wounded part of me couldn't help but think, good. As we drove in silence through the glittering city, my phone began to light up with messages. Friends who had witnessed the spectacle, colleagues expressing shock and sympathy, even reporters already seeking comment on the scandalous end of the Reed-Winters marriage. I turned it off without reading any of them. We'll go to the penthouse, my father said, referring to his downtown residence. It's secure, private, and the press won't be able to get past the building's security. I nodded gratefully. The thought of returning to the home I shared with David, or what had been our home until about 30 minutes ago, was unbearable. He never loved me, did he? The question escaped before I could stop it, my voice small in the spacious car. My father's face softened with a sadness that surprised me. I don't know, Catherine, but I do know that a man who truly loves a woman doesn't humiliate her in front of hundreds of people. You tried to warn me about him, I admitted. Right from the beginning. 7 years ago, when I'd first brought David home to meet my family, my father had been coolly polite but reserved. Later, he'd taken me aside and expressed concerns about David's ambition, about the way his eyes followed the trappings of our wealth rather than focusing on me. I'd dismissed his warnings as overprotectiveness, perhaps even a touch of snobbery toward someone who hadn't been born into privilege. I didn't want to be right, my father said simply. As the car pulled into the private underground garage of his building, I steeled myself for what was to come. The next few days would be a media circus. The publicly discarded wife of a rising financial star, who also happened to be the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest and most powerful men. The headlines wrote themselves. But first, there would be tonight. Tonight, when my father would set in motion the machinery of David's destruction. And despite my usual ethical reservations about using wealth as a weapon, I couldn't bring myself to ask him to stop. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. And this one had been delivered with surgical precision, designed to maximize damage to my heart and my dignity all at once. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, I wondered what would be left of me when the pain finally subsided. And I wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, what would be left of David when my father was done with him. My father's penthouse felt like a fortress high above the chaos of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of glittering lights, but all I could see was David's face as he declared another woman his real wife in front of hundreds of people. "Drink this," my father said, handing me a crystal tumbler with 2 fingers of amber liquid. "It won't fix anything, but it might dull the edges." I accepted the whiskey, taking a small sip and welcoming the burn. My father rarely drank, and I'd inherited his moderation, but tonight seemed to call for something stronger than tea. In the adjacent room, I could hear the murmur of voices. My father's legal and financial teams assembling with remarkable speed, given the late hour. William Reed's call to arms had mobilized an elite squadron of lawyers, accountants, and corporate strategists, all focused on one objective: dismantling David's world piece by piece. "Catherine," my father said, sitting across from me, "I need to know how much you want to be involved in what happens next." I looked up, surprised by the question. My father rarely consulted others on his courses of action, particularly when his protective instincts were triggered. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm going to make sure David and Meridian Capital paid dearly for tonight," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "But how visible you want to be in that process is your choice. If you want to retreat from public view while this plays out, I'll respect that. If you want to stand beside me as we dismantle everything he values, that's an option too." I considered his words carefully. "What exactly are you planning to do?" A hint of the ruthless businessman that had built Reed Developments from nothing flickered across his face. "By morning, I'll own a controlling interest in Meridian's debt. By noon, I'll have enough leverage to force a board meeting. By close of business tomorrow, David will be unemployed, his partnership offer rescinded, and the merger he orchestrated will be in serious jeopardy." Can you really do all that in one day? Despite knowing my father's influence, the timeline seemed ambitious. "Watch me," he replied simply. My phone vibrated again where it sat on the coffee table. I'd turned it back on, unable to completely disconnect even in crisis. The screen showed David's name for the 5th time in the past hour. "You don't have to talk to him," my father said, eyeing the phone with distaste. "I know." I reached for the device anyway, "but I need to hear what he has to say." My father nodded, rising to give me privacy. "I'll be in the study with the team. Take whatever time you need." As he left, I answered the call, putting it on speaker so I wouldn't have to hold the phone to my ear, as if physical distance might somehow protect me from David's words. "Catherine, finally." David's voice came through, tense and slightly breathless. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" The calm in my voice surprised even me. "A bit late for that, don't you think? Listen, I know tonight was unexpected, but you have to call off your father. He's already making calls, threatening the merger. This deal is worth millions," as Catherine. "Years of work could be destroyed overnight." I absorbed his words, noting what was conspicuously absent: an apology, any acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, any recognition of how deeply he'd betrayed me. That's what you're concerned about, the merger. Of course I'm concerned about it. His voice rose in frustration. This is my career, Catherine. Everything I've worked for. And what about our marriage? The 7 years we built a life together? Was that just, what? A stepping stone for your career? There was a pause. And when he spoke again, his voice had shifted to the persuasive tone I'd heard him use in countless negotiations. Look, we both know our marriage hasn't been working for a long time. I should have handled it differently, I admit that. But let's be adults about this. A clean break is better than dragging things out. A clean break, I echoed, incredulous. You humiliated me in front of your entire company and half the financial industry in this city. You announced your affair with all the subtlety of a carnival barker. That's not a clean break, David. That's a public execution. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being accurate. And you know what? You're right about one thing. A clean break is exactly what we need. Consider yourself free to be with your real wife. Catherine, please. His voice took on an edge of desperation. Just talk to your father. He'll listen to you. Tell him to back off Meridian. This isn't just about me. Hundreds of people work there. Jobs are at stake. The calculated appeal to my conscience was so transparent it almost made me laugh. You should have thought about those jobs before you decided to turn your company event into a platform for humiliating the daughter of one of the most powerful men in this city. Is that what this is about? His voice hardened. You running to Daddy to fight your battles? I thought you were so determined to make it on your own, without the Reed name and money. The jab found its mark. I had spent my entire adult life trying to forge a path independent of my father's wealth and influence. David knew this, had even claimed to admire it when we first met. Now he was using it as a weapon against me. Goodbye, David, I said quietly. Catherine, wait. I ended the call, feeling a strange sense of finality. Whatever happened next with Meridian Capital and my father's vendetta, one thing was clear. My marriage was over. Not 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. I expected David, persistent as always, but instead saw Michael Chen's name on the screen. Michael. Catherine, hey, I wanted to check if you're okay. That was quite a scene. His genuine concern was such a stark contrast to David's self-interested panic that I felt my carefully maintained composure begin to crack. I've been better, I managed. I can imagine. Look, I don't want to intrude, but if you need anything, someone to talk to, a friendly face, someone to help you key your husband's car, the last suggestion startled a laugh out of me. I think my father has the revenge angle covered, but thank you. Yes. William Reed's legendary protective streak. The financial world is already buzzing about what he might do. That was fast. News travels at the speed of money, Michael replied, especially when it involves scandal and the potential downfall of a rising star like Meridian. I sighed, suddenly exhausted by all of it. The humiliation, the looming divorce, my father's machinations, the inevitable media circus. Yeah, I just wish I could disappear for a while until this blows over. So do it, Michael said simply. What? Disappear? I have a cabin in the Berkshires. No one knows about it except my closest friends. You could hide out there for a few days, away from the press and the drama. Give yourself space to breathe. The offer was tempting, almost too tempting. I don't know, Michael. There's so much happening here, all of which will proceed whether you're present or not, he pointed out. Your father doesn't need supervision to dismantle David's career, and the divorce proceedings won't begin in earnest for at least a few days. He was right. And the thought of facing the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room, the inevitable questions, it was overwhelming. Let me think about it, I said finally. But thank you, truly. It means a lot that you called. Anytime, Catherine. I mean that. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a few moments, considering Michael's offer. The idea of escape was alluring, but running away had never been my style. And something in me rebelled at the thought of hiding while David spread whatever narrative best suited him about our marriage and its end. My father's study door opened, and he emerged with Richard Winters, his chief legal counsel for over 20 years. Richard nodded to me solemnly. He'd known me since I was a child, had watched me grow up, had even attended my wedding to David. The irony of his last name matching Amanda's didn't escape me. "Catherine," he greeted me, his formal tone softened by genuine concern. "I'm very sorry about tonight's events." "Thank you, Richard. We've drafted the initial divorce papers," he continued, "all business now. Given the public nature of the infidelity and the clear intent to end the marriage that David demonstrated tonight, we're in an unusually strong position. If you're ready, I'd like to go over some details with you." I nodded, straightening my posture. If David thought I would crumble, if he expected me to hide away while he and Amanda built their life on the ruins of mine, he was sorely mistaken. "I'm ready," I said, gesturing for Richard to take a seat. For the next hour, we discussed assets, the prenuptial agreement, which, thankfully, included a significant infidelity clause that David had agreed to without much thought, never imagining he'd be the one caught cheating, and the timeline for proceedings. "Given tonight's public declaration, we can argue for an expedited process," Richard explained. "With your father's connections, I believe we can have this resolved in a matter of weeks rather than months." "And what about Meridian?" I asked, glancing at my father, who had been unusually quiet during the legal discussions. "That's progressing as well," he replied. "I now own approximately 22% of their outstanding debt. By morning, that number will be closer to 60%. James is working on acquiring a significant block of shares that recently became available." I absorbed this information, understanding the strategy at play. My father wasn't just applying pressure. He was positioning himself to take control of the company that had been the center of David's ambitions. "Is this really necessary?" I asked quietly. "I understand going after David, but an entire company." My father's expression remained impassive. Meridian's leadership approved of tonight's display. Robert Hargrove stood on that stage and welcomed Amanda as David's partner, without a second thought for what that meant about his treatment of you. The company culture allowed this to happen, perhaps even encouraged it. "So, yes, Catherine, I believe it is necessary." Before I could respond, my phone lit up with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made the sender's identity clear. "You think you've won because your daddy is fighting your battles? David never loved you. You were just a stepping stone, a connection to the Reed fortune. Now everyone knows it. Enjoy your lonely life with just daddy's money for company. Amanda." I stared at the message, a cold feeling washing over me. Was she right? Had I been nothing more than a convenient rung on David's ladder to success? The thought had been circling my mind since his public betrayal, but seeing it stated so baldly was like having ice water thrown in my face. Without a word, I handed the phone to my father. His expression darkened as he read the message. Then he passed it to Richard, who let out a low whistle. "This is helpful, actually," Richard said. "Clear harassment from the woman involved in the affair? We can use this." "I don't want it used," I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I don't want to drag this out in public any more than it already has been." "Catherine," my father began, his tone suggesting he was about to argue the point. "No, Dad. I mean it. Handle the divorce as quickly and quietly as possible. What you do with Meridian is your business decision. But I don't want a protracted legal battle with Amanda or David being played out in the media. I just want this chapter closed so I can move on with my life." The strength in my voice must have convinced him, because he simply nodded. "As you wish," Richard said, making a note. "We'll proceed with discretion," as he gathered his papers to leave, promising to return in the morning with more detailed documents. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The initial shock and humiliation were giving way to clarity. David had made his choice. Now I would make mine. And my choice would not include allowing him or Amanda to see me broken. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of hushed voices and the gentle clink of cutlery on china. For a moment, I was disoriented, wondering why I was in my old bedroom in my father's penthouse instead of the brownstone I shared with David. Then the memories of the previous night crashed over me like a wave. David on stage, Amanda by his side, my father's cold fury, the text message. I reached for my phone, bracing myself for more communications from David or Amanda, but instead found dozens of messages from friends and colleagues expressing shock, support, and in some cases, insider information about what was happening at Meridian Capital. According to Sophia, who had texted at 7:30 a.m. prior to the company was in chaos, my father's aggressive acquisition of their debt had sent shockwaves through the executive team. An emergency board meeting had been called for 9 a.m., and rumors were flying that the merger, David's crowning achievement, was already falling apart as the other company expressed serious concerns about leadership stability. I checked the time, 8:15 a.m. In less than 12 hours, my father had managed to throw Meridian Capital into disarray. It was both impressive and slightly terrifying to witness his influence wielded so effectively. Wrapping myself in the plush robe that had been laid out for me, my father's staff were nothing if not efficient. I made my way to the dining room. My father sat at the head of the table, several newspapers spread before him, a cup of black coffee in hand. He looked up as I entered. "Good morning, Catherine. How did you sleep?" "About as well as could be expected," I replied, settling into a chair as a housekeeper immediately appeared with a fresh cup of coffee prepared exactly as I liked it. Some things never changed, no matter how long I'd been living on my own. "The board meeting is at 9, my father said, confirming what I'd already heard. "Robert Hargrove has been trying to reach me since dawn. I'm letting him stew for now." "What's your endgame here, Dad?" I asked directly. "Are you planning to dismantle Meridian completely?" My father set down his coffee cup, considering the question. "That depends on several factors, including what you want, Catherine." "What I want is to move on with my life," I said honestly. "David made his choice. Now I need to make mine. And it won't include dwelling on revenge fantasies, satisfying as they might be in the moment." He studied me for a long moment, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You've always been stronger than people give you credit for, including me, at times." "I learned from the best," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Then let me offer you this," he said, folding his newspaper and giving me his full attention. "Today, I'll attend that board meeting and make it very clear to Meridian's leadership that their golden boy has cost them dearly. David's partnership offer will be rescinded. I've already secured enough board support to ensure that happens. The merger will proceed, but without him at the helm. And Amanda? Ms. Winters will find that her position in the legal department has become untenable. I expect she'll tender her resignation by the end of the day, especially after certain ethical concerns about her handling of confidential information come to light." I raised an eyebrow. "What ethical concerns?" "The ones my team discovered this morning when they reviewed her case files," my father replied smoothly. "It seems she's been selectively sharing sensitive client information with David for years, giving him an edge in his negotiations. Most inappropriate." I couldn't help but wonder if these ethical concerns were real or manufactured, but I decided not to press the issue. My father operated in gray areas when it suited him, particularly when protecting family. "So David loses his partnership, the job he's worked toward for years, and Amanda loses her position," I summarized. "Isn't that enough?" "Almost," my father said. "There's also the matter of your financial settlement, which Richard is finalizing now. Given the prenuptial agreement and the clear evidence of infidelity, you'll receive a very favorable outcome. And I've taken the liberty of ensuring that both David and Amanda will find it challenging to secure comparable positions elsewhere in the industry. Dad, not impossible," he clarified, raising a hand to forestall my objection. "Just difficult. They'll need to work considerably harder to rebuild what they so carelessly destroyed. I consider that fair consequence for their actions, don't you?" Put that way, it was hard to argue. David and Amanda had conspired to humiliate me, had planned their public debut as a couple with calculated cruelty. Why should they glide smoothly into their new life together, without facing any real repercussions? "All right," I conceded. "But after today, I want to handle things my way. No more corporate warfare or behind-the-scenes maneuvering." My father inclined his head in agreement. "After today, the matter is in your hands." As if on cue, Richard arrived, a thick folder tucked under his arm. "Good morning," he greeted us, accepting the coffee offered by the hovering housekeeper. "I have the final drafts of the divorce papers and some interesting developments to share." "Go on," my father encouraged. "David called my office at 6 this morning, sounding rather desperate. He's willing to agree to all our terms, the division of assets as outlined in the prenup, the infidelity clause, everything, if we can call off the dogs at Meridian." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the image of David, panicked and scrambling, realizing too late the consequences of his actions. "And what did you tell him?" my father asked. "Make that his requests would be considered after he signed the papers, which my associate delivered to him 30 minutes ago. I expect to have them back, fully executed, within the hour." "Efficient as always, Richard," my father approved. There's more, Richard continued, turning to me. Ms. Winters has also reached out, through her attorney. She's requesting a meeting with you, Catherine. This surprised me. With me? Why? She didn't specify. Her attorney simply said she has something she feels you should know. Absolutely not, my father interjected firmly. Catherine doesn't need to subject herself to whatever manipulative narrative Amanda is planning to spin. I agree, Richard said. Then there's nothing to be gained from such a meeting. But curiosity had sparked in me. What could Amanda possibly want to tell me? An apology? Unlikely, given the venom in her text message. More gloating. That seemed unnecessary. Something about David, perhaps. I'll think about it, I said, earning sharp looks from both men. In the meantime, let's proceed with the divorce papers. The sooner this is finished, the better. Richard nodded, opening his folder to review the documents with me. As we went through the technical details of dismantling my marriage, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Each signature, each initialed page, was another step toward freedom from a man who had never truly valued me as I deserved. By the time we finished, it was nearly 9 o'clock. My father rose, straightening his already impeccable suit. The board meeting, he explained unnecessarily. I should be back by noon. Dad, I called as he reached the door. He turned, one eyebrow raised inquiringly. Don't destroy them completely. Just make your point. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I always do, Catherine. I always do. After he left, I sat alone at the massive dining table, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had always made me slightly uncomfortable. Crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, antique furniture, all symbols of the Reed family power that I had spent years trying to distance myself from. Yet here I was, using that very power as a shield and a sword in the aftermath of betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a new message, Michael, checking in to see how I was doing and renewing his offer of the cabin in the Berkshires. This time, the idea of escape seemed not just tempting but necessary. After the divorce papers were finalized, after my father made his statement at Meridian, perhaps a few days of solitude would help me begin to heal. I texted him back, accepting the offer for the weekend, then called the office where I worked as a financial analyst. My boss was understanding, offering as much time as I needed, likely influenced by the fact that our firm occasionally handled projects for Reed developments. Another ripple effect of my father's influence that I typically resisted, but was now grateful for. As I hung up, a notification appeared on my phone, a breaking news alert about Meridian Capital. The headline made me catch my breath. Financial giant Meridian Capital faces takeover bid amid leadership scandal. The article detailed how an unnamed investor had acquired a controlling interest in Meridian's debt overnight and was now leveraging that position to force significant leadership changes, including the removal of several key executives. The merger that had been announced with such fanfare was now under review, and sources within the company described the atmosphere as panic-stricken. My father worked quickly. I set the phone down, unsure how to feel. Part of me, the wounded, angry part, felt vindicated seeing David's carefully constructed world crumbling so spectacularly. Another part felt uncomfortable with the scale of the response, the collateral damage to people who had nothing to do with my humiliation. But a third part, one I was only beginning to acknowledge, felt something like respect for my father's unwavering commitment to protecting his family. He might be ruthless in business, might operate by a moral code that sometimes diverged from my own, but his loyalty was absolute. There was comfort in that certainty, especially now when everything else in my life felt so precarious. The morning stretched into afternoon as I waited for news. Richard came and went, confirming that David had indeed signed all the divorce papers without contest. The documents would be filed immediately, and given the circumstances and my father's influence, the process would be expedited. I could be legally free of David within weeks rather than months. Shortly after noon, my father returned, his expression satisfied in a way that told me the board meeting had gone exactly as he'd planned. It's done, he said simply. Accepting the glass of water a staff member immediately brought him. David is out. The partnership offer has been rescinded. He's been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending review of his conduct. And Amanda? Resigned effective immediately. Apparently, the evidence of her ethical violations was rather compelling. I studied his face, trying to determine if these violations had been legitimate discoveries or carefully constructed frames. His expression revealed nothing. The merger, I asked instead. Proceeding, but under new leadership. Meridian will survive, though somewhat chastened. He took a seat across from me. As requested, I didn't destroy them completely, just made my point. Thank you, I said quietly. Catherine, he began, his tone softening. What will you do now? It was a fair question. My life had been upended in less than 24 hours. My marriage was over. My social circle would inevitably fracture as people chose sides. The comfortable routine I had built over 7 years had been shattered beyond repair. I'm going to the Berkshires for a few days, I said. Michael Chen offered his cabin. I need some space to think. If my father had any thoughts about Michael's involvement, he kept them to himself, merely nodding. And after that, I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe it's time for a change, a real one. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you know I'll support you. Financially, yes, but in every other way as well. Coming from William Reed, that was as close to an emotional declaration as one was likely to get. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. I know, Dad. And despite our differences over the years, I'm grateful for that. As I prepared to leave for the Berkshires the next morning, packing the few essentials I'd need for a weekend retreat, my phone rang with an unknown number. Something told me who it might be even before I answered. Hello? Catherine? It's Amanda. Amanda, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I'm surprised you'd call directly after everything that's happened. Believe me, this isn't a conversation I want to have, she replied, her tone clipped. But there are things you should know. Things David never told you. Curiosity won out. I'm listening. Not over the phone, she insisted. In person. That's not going to happen. It's about the money, Catherine. Your money. The Reed fortune. A chill ran through me. What about it? Like I said, not over the phone. Meet me at Westlake Park in an hour, by the fountain. I found myself changing into a simple but elegant outfit and heading to the park without telling my father. Whatever this meeting held, I wanted to face it on my own terms. Amanda was waiting by the fountain, looking strained despite her expensive clothes and makeup. I'm not here to apologize, she began. What happened between David and me, we fell in love. The timing wasn't ideal, but the feelings were real. If you invited me here to justify your affair, this meeting is over, I said, already beginning to rise. No, she said quickly. That's not why. Please, just listen. She removed a folder from her portfolio. 3 months ago, I discovered something while preparing documents for the merger. Irregularities in Meridian's accounting that didn't make sense. I frowned. Financial misconduct at Meridian isn't exactly surprising news at this point. This is different, Amanda insisted. These transactions involved Reed Development subsidiaries. David has been siphoning money from Reed Developments for years, using his position at Meridian. In total, nearly $17 million. She handed me the folder containing printouts of financial transactions, bank statements, and internal Meridian documents. Why would you show me this? I asked. You're implicating yourself as well. I only discovered the full extent recently, she explained. David kept me in the dark, using my legal expertise when necessary but compartmentalizing the information. Why tell me now? Why not go to my father? She laughed humorlessly. William Reed would have me arrested on the spot as an accomplice. And after what happened at the party, he'd be justified. So this is self-preservation, I concluded. Partly, she admitted. But you deserve to know the truth. David didn't just betray you emotionally. He was stealing from your family for years. I sat back, letting the magnitude sink in. How long were you two together while he was stealing from my family? 2 years. But the theft started much earlier. About a year after you were married. 6 years of systematic theft while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband. The audacity was breathtaking. I need to show these to my father, I said, closing the folder. I assumed you would. Amanda seemed resigned. What happens to me now? That depends on how much you knew, and when you knew it. She held my gaze steadily. I suspected something 3 months ago. I confirmed it 6 weeks ago. I only realized the full extent yesterday when he started transferring large sums offshore after your father's takeover began. And you have proof? She handed me a USB drive. Everything's here. All the documentation, including emails between David and his accomplices. Why should I believe you're not just saving yourself by throwing David under the bus? Because I'm still in love with him, she said simply. Despite the lies, the fraud, using both of us, part of me still loves him. But I won't go down with him for crimes I didn't knowingly commit. I can't promise anything, I said. I'll take this to my father. What happens next will depend on him. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Amanda, was any of it real? Between you and David? Or was it all about the money? Pain flickered across her face. I don't know anymore. I thought it was real. Now I wonder if either of us ever really knew him. William Reed's expression darkened as he examined the evidence from Amanda's folder. 17 million, my father said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. For 6 years, right under our noses. I'm sorry, Dad, I said automatically. He looked up sharply. This is not your fault, Catherine. Never think that. But I brought him into our lives despite your reservations. You fell in love, he said simply. It happens to the best of us. What will you do now? I asked, nodding toward the evidence. First, verify everything, then involve the authorities. His expression was grim but resolute. Financial fraud of this magnitude is a federal crime. David won't just lose his career, he'll likely face prison time. And Amanda? Based on what you've told me, she came forward voluntarily. That counts for something. I'll have Richard look into potential immunity arrangements for her testimony. I nodded, relieved. Despite everything, I didn't wish to see Amanda destroyed. 3 days later, I sat on the deck of Michael's cabin in the Berkshires, watching the sunset. My phone lay deliberately turned off beside me. No news, no updates, just peace and my own thoughts. A car approached on the gravel drive. My father emerged from his Bentley, looking unusually casual in a sweater and slacks. David was arrested this morning, he said once he'd joined me. A federal agents took him at his apartment. The evidence was overwhelming. I absorbed this, searching myself for any pain or regret. There was none, only a sense of justice. Good. Amanda has entered a cooperation agreement. She'll avoid jail time, though her legal career is over, he continued. And David tried to flee the country last night. He was intercepted at a private airfield with cash and false identification documents. I shook my head at David's desperation. He really thought he could escape. He underestimated us, my father said simply. We sat in silence, watching the sunset. I've been thinking about what comes next, I said finally. I want to come work for you. My father turned to me, surprised. After all these years avoiding the family business, what changed? Everything, I admitted. I spent so long trying to prove I could make it on my own that I missed something important. Independence doesn't have to mean isolation. Accepting my heritage doesn't diminish what I've accomplished. You've always had a place at Reed Developments, he said. Though I want to start in the investment division, where my experience is relevant. No special treatment. Done, he agreed without hesitation. As darkness fell, my father mentioned, Michael Chen has been calling daily for updates. For someone who's just an old friend, he seems remarkably concerned. I smiled. Michael's a good friend. One of the few who reached out with no agenda after everything happened. Just a friend, he pressed. For now, I said, surprising myself. Who knows what the future holds? As my father prepared to leave, promising to return in 2 days, I felt closure beginning to form around the jagged edges of recent events. David's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I was building, but something new and potentially stronger was emerging. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal proceedings, press coverage, pitying glances, and whispered gossip. But I would face it all on my own terms, with the knowledge that I was more resilient than I'd ever given myself credit for. And I wouldn't face it alone. My father had proven himself an unwavering ally. Michael offered the possibility of a healthier connection than I'd known with David. Even Amanda had ultimately chosen truth over continued deception. As stars emerged in the clear mountain sky, I imagined the next chapter, not as David's wife or even as William Reed's daughter, but simply as Catherine Reed, a woman coming into her own power on her own terms. The company party that had begun this journey seemed a lifetime ago now. David's public humiliation, calling another woman his real wife, had been meant to break me. Instead, it had catalyzed a liberation I hadn't known I needed. Sometimes, it takes losing everything you thought you wanted to discover what you truly need. In my case, it took a very public betrayal to find my way back to myself, and perhaps, eventually, to a love more genuine than anything David had ever offered. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. Eyes open, spine straight, heart wiser, but not hardened. And that was its own kind of victory.